상설범 6664금 여삼일 11일 역부의 알세주묘암 열애상 오현삼매세계성 화장세계노사나 열애명모사성제 강명각품문명부엄 정대연수선미정 사금여삼일시비 봄살십주법명봄 팔심공더명범봄 불설야마천궁구엄 연마천궁예참봉 십행궁여무진장 불설도솔천궁 봄도솔천궁예참봄 십회향급 십지품 십정십통 십인품 마승지품 여소량 오살주처불불사 열애십심상예품 열애수공덕품 고연행검 열애출 이세간품 인법계 시위십만계 성정 상식국분 원망전 풍성착경신서제 초발심시변정가 한자여시국토에 심영미로잖아 대방광불화음경 용수보살약찬계 남무 화장세계 비로잔나 진법신 언제설법노사나 석가모니제열애 과거 현재 미래세 시방일제제대성 번화음전범요원 해인삼매세력고 오염보살제대중 집건강신신중신 족행신중 도량신 주성신중 주지신 주산신중 주림신 주약신중 주가신 주하신중 주해신 주수신중 주하신 주풍신중 주공신 주방신중 주야신 주주신중 아수라 가루라 왕긴나라 아후라가 야차왕 제대용왕 구반다 근달바왕 월천자 일천자 중도리천 남마천왕도 설천 화락천왕 타와천 대법천왕 광음천 변정천왕 광과천 대자제왕 불가설 보염문소대보살 급해공덕 건강당 건강장급 건강에 광염당급 숲미당 대덕성문사리자 금여비구해각도암 무바세장무바이 선제동자동암역이 소무량 물가설 선제동자 선지식 운수사리 체질 더군의 운선조성 이가 해달려 해당 구사비목 구사선 성열바라자 행여 성견자지 주동자 부조구바 명제사 법보계장 여보안 무렴조광대광왕 우동우바변행매 우바라와 장자인 마시라선 무상성 아자비신바수밀 비실지라 그 사행 관자제존 여정세 천안조주제신 마삼마연주야신 보덕정광주야신 회목관찰중생신 보구중생요덕신 석점합매주야신 소일체주야신 부수와주야신 대원전진역구 묘득원망구반영 마야부연천조강연우 동자중예가 현성경과 해탈장 묘헐장자무성구원 최적정발람원자의 덕생동자유등영 이룩보살문소당 보염보살미진중 어차법회운집내 상수비로잔하부월 흐련화장세계 조화 장음대법륜 시방허공제세계 역구역시 상설범 육용육사금 여삼일십일일 역부의 열세주묘암열애상 오현삼매세계성 화장세계노사나 열애명호사성제 강명각품 문명품 정예현수순미정 금희정상계참품 법살십주법명품 팔심공더명범품 불설얀마천궁품 연마천궁계참품 십행kum여무진장 불설도솔천궁품 도솔천궁계참품 십회향급 십지품 십정십통 십인품 마승지품 여소량 오살주처불불사 혈의십신상예품 열애수공덕품 고연행검열애출 이세간품 임법계의 시위십만계 성정 상식국분 원망전 홍성차경신소제 초발심시변정가 한자여시국토의 심영미로잖아 대방광불화음경용수보살약찬계 남무 화장세계 비로잔나 진법신 언제슬범노사나 석가모니제열의 과거 현재 미래세 시방일체제대성 근본화음전범요원 해인삼매세력고 오염보살제대중 집건강신신중신 족행신중도량신 주성신중 주지신 주산신중주림신 주약신중주가신 주하신중주해신 주수신중주하신 주풍신중주공신 주방신중 주야신 주주신중 아수라 가루라 왕긴나라 아후라가 야차왕 제대용왕 구반다 근달바왕 월천자 일천자 중도리천 남마 천왕도 설천 화락 천왕 타와천 대법 천왕 광음천 변정 천왕 광과천 대저제 왕불가설 부유문수대보살 급해공덕 건강당 금강장급 건강에 광염당급 숭희당 대덕성문사리자 금여비구해각도암 무바세장무바리 선제동자동암역이 소무량 물가설 선제동자 선지식 운수사리 체질 더군의 운선조성 니가 해달려 해당 구사비목 구사선 성열바라자 행여 성견자지 주동자 부조구바 명지사 법보계장 여보안 무렴조광대광왕 우동우바변행매 우바라와 장자인 마시라선 무상성 아자비신바수밀 비실지라 그 사행 관자제존여정세 대천안조주제신 마삼마연주야신 보덕정광주야신 회목관 찰융생신 보구중생요덕신 석점험매주야신 소일체주야신 기부수와주야신 대원전진역구 묘득엄망구반영 마야부연천조강연우 동자중예가 삼성영거 해탈장 요헐장자무성구원 최적정갈람문자의 덕생동자유등령 이룩보살문수동 보염보살미진중 차법회운짐내 상수비로잔하부월 흐련화장세계 조화 장음대법륜 시방허공제세계
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. We'll start with our 10-minute meditation, then we'll recite our Gatha, and then we'll get into our discussion. As I just said a few minutes ago, I'm kind of doing an experiment with live streaming this on YouTube and on Zoom. I don't see anybody on yet, but I know there were a few people that expressed interest in that. So that's why the computer is here, in case anybody hops on, because I know some people don't have the means to make it to the temple. So I wanted to try to make it accessible. So hopefully that won't distract us too much. Good evening again, everyone. A few more people coming in. Hello, Jack. Can you hear me? I think you might be muted. I don't hear you, but thank you for connecting and being here. Okay.
There, how was that?
I'm going to get some feedback if I turn on my speaker here, so I'll have to figure that out, but thank you for joining. Jack, if you want to maybe use the chat, we can do that, but I can't turn on my speaker, so we won't be able to hear you tonight, so you might just have to listen in today, and then I'll figure it out. Well, welcome everyone. As you can see, Sunim and Shinmyo, right? Got it. I am still trying to remember everybody's, I haven't, Dharma names. I got my laptop here, so I'm set up a Zoom and a YouTube link for some people that can't physically be here at the temple but wanted to participate. So we have Jack Sustic on the Zoom call here, maybe some other people watching on YouTube. So that's why the computer is there tonight. Hopefully it won't be too distracting, aside from the fans are pretty noisy. So I apologize about that. We'll open tonight with our opening Gatha, our Munsusari Bosal Gatha. If you don't have a copy, do you have yours, Sunam? There's one, there's some more over there on the, if you want to grab that. Oh, and if you want to maybe turn up the lights, I dimmed the lights so we can see what we're reading. All right, that's good. Yeah. A little darker for meditation's okay, but when we're trying to study and read things, it's helpful to have that. All right. So together, we'll say homage to Deji Munsu Sari Bosal, the Bodhisattva of great wisdom, who holds to his heart a scriptural text symbolic of his seeing all things as they are, whose intelligence shines forth like the sun, unclouded by the two obscurations, who teaches in 60 ways with the loving compassion of a parent for his only child, all creatures caught in the prison of samsara, confused in the darkness of their ignorance, overwhelmed by their suffering. Munsu Bosal, whose thunder-like proclamation of Dharma arouses us from the stupor of our afflictions and frees us from the iron chains of our karma, who wields the sword of wisdom that cuts down the roots of suffering wherever they appear, clearing away the darkness of ignorance, whose princely body is adorned with the 112 marks of a Buddha, who has completed the stages achieving the highest perfection of a bodhisattva, who has been pure from the beginning. We pay homage to you, Deji Munsu Sari Bosal. Om Mara Pashanadi. Om Mara Pashanadi. Om Mara Pashanadi. With the brilliance of your wisdom, O compassionate one, illuminate the darkness enclosing our minds, enlighten our intelligence and wisdom, so that we may gain insight into the Buddha's words and the texts that explain them. Namu Deji Munsu Sari Bosal. Namu Deji Munsu Sari Bosal. Namu Deji Munsu Sari Bosal. Okay. I'll just go around quickly and introduce ourselves. I'm Bup Me.
Kelly.
Bup Wu.
Alex. Okay. Yambo. Shinyo.
Great. All right. Thank you all. So I updated the schedule for this study group, if you pick that up, or I sent this out over email as well. So we're going to continue our study for a while. Originally, today was going to be the last day. I set it up for 4 weeks, but like I said, over the past few weeks, that's not enough time. So we're just going to keep trucking right along. I scheduled it out at least through the end of May. My summer schedule may change come the end of May. So I'll talk with the other clergy here and we'll figure it out. So I may have to hand off or change days or something like that. But I think Thursday is a good day for most people. So we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. And I'll keep everybody posted. But at least through the end of May, we'll continue like this. And Bapu's going to help me out at the end of next month because I have to travel at the end of April. So just a FYI on that coming up, so we can plan at least for the next several weeks like this. So last week we had started chapter 3. I'm going to find it here. I think this is in our translation. We're using the Eknath S. Warren translation on page 115. So I'd just like to read chapter 3 again, and then we'll spend most of or a little bit of time talking about it, reflecting on how some of the insights and principles and other things kind of arose in our life this past week. And then before we leave, we'll start into the next chapter on chapter 4. So this is chapter 3, mind. As an archer aims an arrow, the wise aim their restless thoughts. Hard to aim, hard to restrain. As a fish hooked and left on the sand thrashes about in agony, the mind being trained in meditation trembles all over, desperate to escape the hand of Mara. Hard it is to train the mind, which goes where it likes and does what it wants. But a trained mind brings health and happiness. The wise can direct their thoughts, subtle and elusive, wherever they choose. A trained mind brings health and happiness. Those who can direct thoughts, which are unsubstantial and wander so aimlessly, are freed from the bonds of Mara. They are not wise whose thoughts are not steady and minds not serene, who do not know Dharma, the law of life. They are wise whose thoughts are steady and minds serene, unaffected by good and bad. They are awake and free from fear. Remember, this body is like a fragile clay pot. Make your mind a fortress and conquer Mara with the weapon of wisdom. Guard your conquest always. Remember that this body will soon lie in the earth without life, without value, useless as a burned log. More than those who hate you, more than all your enemies, an undisciplined mind does greater harm. More than your mother, more than your father, more than all your family, a well-disciplined mind does greater good. I'll just kind of open it up. If anybody feels so inspired, let's have an open discussion.
I think one thing that comes to mind when thinking about this chapter of the mind is the news this week, the Oscars. Will Smith, and I know that, like, from what I know about him, that he is a somewhat spiritual guy and he practices some things, but obviously he lost his cool in that moment, instead of being steady and maybe taking some time to think about how he was going to react. He wasn't able to do that.
Yeah, that was definitely on the news circuit. A lot of people have been talking about that this week, right? Yeah, it's interesting to think about that space between kind of stimulus and reaction, right? And how maybe in my life I tried to like work within that space before like having like a knee-jerk kind of reaction. So that was a unfortunate example of this kind of overwhelm of emotion and whatever else, you know, he might say he felt in that moment, to turn that into some action, right? Has obviously a lot of consequences in a lot of ways. So hard it is to train the mind, for sure. For sure.
I will say that just from my own practice over the years and my own interests in the Dharma, and it was I can definitely tell the wax and wane of practice versus not practice. So when things kind of drop off and you're not really kind of pursuing that, it doesn't really take too long for that mind, the monkey mind, to really kind of grab hold and allow you to be more impulsive, allow you to maybe not be as mindful, and on the opposite is that when you are in that practice and you are doing that, you can have that reflected mind to kind of notice a difference between, you know, how I might have been had I, you know, not been practicing, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that you know, it is hard to train the mind, and that's part of that. I think it is because of the stimulus around us, the desires around us, all of that, right? Yeah, but I can totally tell, right? I mean, you really can get a sense of how well and healthy you can and are when you do practice. So.
Yeah, that last point you just said about the connection between health too, just grabbed me, because I was looking at verse 35 here, at the end of the second sentence in verse 35, that says, "But a trained mind brings health and happiness." Yeah. And this, you know, in my work in the hospital, as most of you know, and I think some others of us work in, you know, healthcare, and or it doesn't really matter where you work, right? But just seeing that connection, even I saw it in my own life too. When this past week, when I get more kind of stressed and less attentive and kind of focused, I make different choices, right? As far as like how I spend my time, how I move my body or don't, what I consume and all of that. So like, and a lot of, you know, the health sciences have, you know, also kind of reiterated this ancient wisdom, right? The strong connection between mind and health, not just from a mental health perspective, but how, you know, our physical health is also, you know, our mind controlling everything that flows out from that. So there's, I think, a lot of good benefits, right, of, you know, how we think about and treat and the kind of relationship we have with our mind. And I think most of us in this room and on this call, right, have been interested in this kind of connection, or at least, you know, focus on it, maybe more so than other people we know around in our lives who we, you know, witness this and see this. So that's something that stood out to me in this chapter this week, was that connection and the kind of that feedback loop, or that cyclical kind of connection. Because when for me, like, they kind of feed each other, right? Like if I just kind of like veg out and get really lazy and just like eat a bunch of crap and whatever, then I get, you know, more tired and fatigued, and that goes in my mind and my kind of motivation to practice. And then, you know, it's this kind of negative reinforcing loop too. So, you know, a lot of this chapter really resonated with me of just, again, kind of take me back to chapter 2 and talk about vigilance and diligence and all the other kind of synonyms we want to put. But yeah, about trained mind brings health and happiness. That resonated with me this week.
Along with, you know, studying this chapter, I've also been reading the introduction.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if any of you, you know, read the introduction or started reading the introduction. It's quite long. It's about 100 pages.
Yeah.
The longest introduction I ever saw in a book. And so I started reading it because I thought, well, it's, you know, a good part of this book. And I know it's not, you know, the Buddha's direct teachings, but the part that I've been reading is about his life, you know, and it's really an expansion on the standard story that, you know, we all are told of what, you know, how the Buddha became a Buddha. And I just found it really, really interesting because not only did it expand on what his life was like, you know, in the palace and, you know, how he came to leave the palace and all that kind of stuff, and all that stuff, what he actually did under the Bodhi tree as when he, you know, when he reached enlightenment, mm-hmm. and what it meant to reach enlightenment. And it just really struck me that the way it's described in the story is that he reached such a deep place of meditation that he was able to let go of his personality and kind of reach a state which it's like the absolute. You know, we talk about the relative realm and the absolute realm. It was really the absolute realm is where he reached. And when I read this verse, 39, they are wise whose thoughts are steady and their minds serene, unaffected by good and bad. That's really the absolute, you know, where you're not, where, you know, those terms are meaningless, you know, and that's really where he reached was nirvana, being completely, you know, those good and bad was irrelevant. It was irrelevant. And then it explained that, you know, he was able to move in and out of that state. You know, he was able to move into nirvana at will and then move out again. And that's how, you know, how he lived his life from there, you know. So nirvana is not a state you reach and then it's like, okay, I'm here and I'm, you know, that's it. You can't, you know, he was able to do that. And to me, it's like, what does a trained mind mean? You know, when this chapter talks about a trained mind, what exactly does that mean? You know, how focused, you know, do you have to be to know you have a trained mind? You know, if you go by that story of the Buddha, it's like, I can't imagine too many people reach that state of a trained mind where, you know, they're able to go in and out of nirvana at will, you know, but does it mean that, you know, you're at least able to focus enough that your life is in order and you're at least not affected by the, you know, the winds that blow, mm-hmm. you know, through your life, you know, on a daily basis. Is that what a trained mind is really? You know, so I don't know. It just raised a lot of questions for me. Like, you know,
it's good.
Just being a new, you know, a new Buddhist and new to meditation. It's like, you know, when you say you know, kind of beat up on yourself when you feel like your meditation is not, you know, as quality as it should be. It's like, you know, should we really be doing that, beating up on ourselves? You know, are we at least trying, you know, to reach a state of having a trained mind? Mm-hmm. And if we are, isn't that okay? You know?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Thank you for that reflection, Yambul.
Yeah.
Yeah. It as you were speaking, I was connecting with a lot of what you were saying. And I just want to say, Jack, too, if you want to jump into the conversation, I don't know if you can use the raise your hand or put something in the chat. I can mute myself so we don't get that feedback loop if you want to, jump into any part of the conversation here today, okay?
Okay. Does that sound better?
About the Buddha going in and out of nirvana at will, and if part of, if what it says here, having thoughts that are steady and mind serene, unaffected by good and bad, they are awake and free from fear. At least in my own life, I feel like I've had some moments or some times where I felt, my mind being more steady and serene, where things happened and I wasn't necessarily like pulled in any strong way to react, right? Like you talk about the Will Smith incident, right? Like this space between something happening and reacting. And obviously that was a very strong and visceral, and maybe some people would say a very undisciplined reaction, right? I've had times like that, where I felt like, okay, maybe something has happened, but whatever I was in, the conditions of my mind or what was going on, I wasn't as bothered by it. And I know other times where the littlest thing could set me off, right? And I get really pissed off on something that was like so meaningless and trivial. So even this idea of this like kind of this serenity or nirvana, if you will, that's also an impermanent kind of state, a fleeting state. And this going back and forth, like I wouldn't say I have like full like volitional control or willpower to like, turn it on or turn it off, like you read, like, the Buddha being able to do. But I think like, and as, we talk about, the more training and energy and like cultivating a habit, right, of like rewiring ourselves and building new, like what anyway, modern neuroscience, is starting to find more about, of how we can rewire our brains and ourselves and build these new pathways and build new habits. It's kind of, habit energy. And, we don't get a lot into deeper Buddhist, philosophy and concepts like the 12 links of origination and all that in here. But a lot of that stuff that maybe came up in the introduction that I don't know if you got to yet, because it is a long introduction, like you said, like 100 pages, but it starts talking about, the kind of underlying foundation, the like philosophical kind of foundation that we see here in this like more accessible form in the verse format, right? So yeah, lots of good questions there. But that question of like, what is a trained mind? What does that mean, right?
Yeah.
And how do you recognize it or see it in your own life? Like.
So I'll just say she stole my question.
Yeah.
What is a trained mind?
Well,
Oh.
I will say this, that the first 37 were those who can direct thoughts which are unsubstantial and wander so aimlessly are freed from the bonds of Mara. So about me, what you were saying, I was thinking, gosh, there's a train. So without the effort, in mindfulness and meditation and practice and all that, right? We go through life based on our conditioning, based on our culture, based on a lot of things that we're told and we're pointed, directions we're pointed to. But this is saying at the very first, those who can direct thoughts, right? So this is more of a sense for me, it's more of a challenge, like not to take a lot of that just for ultimate absolute truth, right? Training, I think, training the mind is being able to be open to directing our thoughts even when our core is telling us, no, we eat 2 large pizzas or whatever it is, versus, however, so I it goes into the habit energy and the conditioning that's behind it. So training the mind is the trained mind in a way, right?
I think something like having a kind of ethical kind of curriculum I think of, like, for my mind, right? Like, what kind of programming or like direction, right? Think about this analogy: the archer aims the arrow. They have to have some reference point for where to aim. That's what aim is, right? You have a target, because if you don't have anything, you're not aiming anywhere. You're not really aiming, right?
Right.
So this idea of aim means you have something that you're pointing at. So where I'm going with this, thinking like, those who can direct their thoughts are freed. This idea of what kind of thoughts we want to build habit energies around, right? Like compassion and forgiveness and equanimity and upekkha, or this sympathetic joy, right? The Brahma Viharas, the kinds of things that throughout the Dhammapada and other sources and aspects of the practice, like we have these kind of different meditations to specifically cultivate these qualities, right? Not just there's an aspect of watching and recognizing what's there, but if I'm like in a funk or in a bad mood, I can get into that, again, perpetuating just garbage in my mind, right? Like if I'm holding a grudge at somebody, right, I can generate a lot of thoughts to justify and rationalize, yeah, like I'm right, like, and keep going down that kind of like narrative arc in a way. Or I could, interrupt that, change the programming, and choose to, re-aim, recalibrate, recenter. So that's what I think about this archer aiming an arrow, right? That you do take some kind of intentional like agency in your mind habits in some way, and kind of like the swimming against the stream metaphor that we see a lot in Buddhist literature and in practice and in scripture. So working on one's aim.
That's right.
Can you hear me?
Oh, hold on. Okay, yeah, I see you're unmuted. Go ahead, Jack. I'll try to.
Yeah, it seems like this training of the mind, it doesn't just happen during meditation. It's constant and always. I think sometimes the meditation is the coach, and then we have to go out and play the game, so to speak. We always have to remind ourselves how to react in certain situations, and meditation helps us to do that. But the training is always there 24/7, I think.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. We were getting I don't know, on our end, we could understand you and it was coming through, but it's a little choppy, so I'm not sure exactly why that is, but it could be on my end. So I'm going to work on it and do that. But yeah, thanks for sharing that. Yeah. Anything else from this chapter that kind of stuck out or resonated? Shinmyo or Shingyo, did you have anything?
I think it's interesting. The first verse is basically it's saying that the wise can have restless thoughts, and I always think that, like if you're a fool, if you're a foolish person, restless thoughts, it's a given, right? But you wouldn't think it's so much that the wise can have restless thoughts, because restless thoughts seem so, that maybe in practice, like it's so, I'm just surprised that it starts with that.
That may be something that, by the virtue or nature of being wise, that somehow like maybe progress.
Transcended, the fact that it just seems.
Yeah. Kind of restlessness, yeah.
Early in your practice, you might, it's having a monkey mind, having a restless mind, but if you're already be wise, you should be well versed in practice, maybe on in years or whatever, to actually be wise, to be considered that. And it says, basically it's saying that you can still have restless thoughts,
Yeah.
even though you're wise.
Take that as a kind of encouragement, right? That,
Right.
Even if we cultivate some kind of wisdom or this serenity or steadiness of mind, that, yeah, restless thoughts are still going to be part of our experience, even after we maybe reach some point of to be considered, part of the wise, right? That's still going to be part of the experience and something that is with us that we have to deal with. Yeah. So I think that's encouraging that there's still hope for,
right, for sure.
still hope for us, right? Yeah. Anything else from this chapter anybody wanted to talk about? This last, I'll say one more thing on this chapter, and then we can start on chapter 4 here. The second part of verse 40. I know last week I talked about this idea of the metaphor of the body as a fragile clay pot, and but this other part of this verse: make your mind a fortress and conquer Mara with the weapon of wisdom, guard your conquest always. That rereading this again and thinking about the imagery of that and the analogy made me pause, thinking about that's a very, again, strong kind of metaphor. Make your mind a fortress. And I haven't quite, I guess, for myself, I don't want to say reconciled, but made sense of what that means, because in some of my training, we talk about a lot about vulnerability and being open, right? And taking down kind of barriers or the shielding that we have. So we talk in my circles, we talk about people put up blocks, right, to keep experiences and feelings and emotions and people out to kind of protect themselves in some way. But here in the Dhammapada, saying make your mind a fortress and uses weapon of wisdom. So I'm trying to situate that or integrate that with this other kind of conversation about taking defenses down to become more vulnerable, more open, and not to reject things. So I haven't quite figured that one out.
I think you can almost do both.
Yeah.
It's it's good to be vulnerable when we're dealing with people and ourselves, but also I see this as more you're protecting yourself. So if you're in a situation, for example, where someone's coming at you, yelling at you, or then you have that fortress of your mind to stay calm within that space.
Okay. Yeah.
I think this goes back to the concept of vigilance that they talked about in the previous chapter.
Yeah.
Vigilance, being watchful, and guarding your mind.
Yeah.
So that you don't fall into sloth and
all the other hindrances.
Hindrances that keep you from really honing your mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I see if it's I see if this is the Buddha's word saying that. I almost think the way I see it, it's easy for you to say. Make your mind a fortress and conquer Mara. Most of us don't conquer Mara. That's it's kind of a tall order, right? Make your mind a fortress. My mind a shack. Not a fortress.
Yeah, that was back in chapter 1 we were talking about the ill-thatched hut, right?
Yeah. I'm relating this to values. So make your
values.
Yeah. Make your mind a fortress and conquer Mara with the weapon of wisdom. The fortress being that what do I value? What do I value and point to, aim at? And that's the kind of and it says guard your conquest always, right? So, you know, your fortress is what it is that's pointing you towards that direction. And Mara, of course, is going to, you know, want to play with that, I would imagine. And so it's not a matter of the fortress of granite. It's a much more of fortress of direction.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. For me, I don't know.
I have a question, honestly, about Mara. Is so in the, I guess I don't know call it lore and the legend, but is it basically the Buddha's imagination, him coming up with kind of a being, and he calls Mara? Because there's no other. It's basically it's almost like Satan, where it's a tempter, but it's some of the, I don't know if it's stories or not, where he actually basically coming and tempting him and showing him all this stuff or whatever. It seems like a lot of Jesus parallel or parallel to you know, sermon or the, you know, Jesus' temptation and all that. But it just sounds like it's something that a personality sort of that the Buddha made up to, you know, give us like an analogy of a person. But in all reality, what really happened? Was he just sitting there and his mind was just thinking of an image of someone or some force that truly doesn't exist? Not a spirit or a devil or a demon, really, right?
Yeah. So I want to get to that, but
the story in the introduction, Mara is very real. Mara the tempter.
Yeah.
He's not making it up.
No, but I'm saying this, but he's trying to give an analogy of this, you know, either that or, because we know Mara is not a person, not a human being.
Well, you could say it's the archetype of all the temptations in the world.
But that's an imagination.
Say the devil's not real, Satan's not real. You know, but still, the world is full of temptations, and you know, that's more of an avatar or an archetype.
Right.
You know, but it's still real.
But it's nothing more than, you know, because it wasn't like people were talking about the legend of Mara before the Buddha's time. It's something that he basically came up with to say, you know, Mara is basically an antithesis of, you know, what I had to deal with to get to where I am now, awakened. I had to defeat this entity or this personality that was basically coming against me, and he defeated this Mara. And I guess only Buddha since then have done the same thing. But really, in all reality, that's what it is, right? This is his imagination, not imagination, but his, you know, it's a now construct that he came up with, right? And then they basically used it afterward to say, to tell us what Mara means, basically what you have to transcend to be awake.
Yeah, I know Mara's come up a few times. I want to circle back to that. I know Shimio, you were about to say something. You had a thought a few minutes ago, and I wanted to come back to see if. I didn't want to
remember what it was.
I agree, just because I have kind of a really different take on this, because I'm kind of caught in the medical matrix at the moment. And so a lot of what I thought about, remember the body is like a fragile clay pot, which now I wonder if you can ever remember that except for when you're deep into it. Because then you think about it like every minute. So I saw this as a contrast between how the Buddha versus there'll be one thing and then the opposite thing. So to me, it's remember the body is a fragile clay pot, and then it's telling you that the mind is a fortress. So the mind is the opposite of a fragile body clay pot.
Oh, that's an interesting contrast, huh?
And maybe the mind be something more than not just the brain, but how we use it that way. So that's where I was coming from. And the only other comment was I did catch myself a bad habit that, now I just did it, a habit that I had that I tried to change of saying things were good or bad. And I was at a doctor's office and was rattling off like a bunch of things that have to happen. And I wanted to say, that's really bad. And instead I go, well, that's very overwhelming. And so I don't know if it's much better than bad, and he goes, I'm sorry. And it kind of like, just his response to me, by me not saying, oh, that's so bad, you know, but somehow it felt so much better when he said that to me, that he said, well, I'm sorry that it's overwhelming to you.
Yeah.
So
But yeah, I do really, because I do wonder if I'll even remember what this is like, these feelings are like later on.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. So a lot of good things I wanna respond to and touch on regarding Mara, because I think Mara's come up a few times already in the Dhammapada that we've seen. So maybe next week I'll bring a little bit more about Mara, and we can look at that concept and dig into that. So you hold on to next week. We'll circle back and revisit this concept or this idea of Mara, and try to get some bearings on that, because this has come up a few times in the Dhammapada. So that'll be my homework to help us kind of make sense of that here. And this other thing you just mentioned, Shinmyo, about kind of renaming or relabeling something rather than jump just to this dichotomous good bad kind of evaluation. I'll share something that I've been doing recently at the hospital with my students, is working on developing a more kind of nuanced emotional vocabulary. I think it's something that generally in our culture, our kind of emotional naming and accuracy is very rudimentary. And being able, rather than being able to really, and part of this ties into our meditation practice and our awareness practice, to see things as they are. If we don't have the part of the language or the concepts to kind of get a little bit more granular, then things just start kind of lumping together into these more undefined kind of things. And then we get this kind of really high level good or bad, right? And if that's the only way we can see things without being able to get a bit more detail, to really describe more accurately, this isn't good or bad. It is overwhelming. It's more than what I have the capacity to cope with right now. To start getting a little bit more descriptive in that way, we can see we don't need to place a judgment on the experience necessarily, but be able to recognize kind of beyond just, coming to a conclusion about it, right? So yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's something that I've been working on, has been a big focus of my work lately. And have any of you heard of Brene Brown? Or I think a lot of people no. Brene Brown is a social worker and researcher by background. She's now kind of a celebrity kind of status. She's written a few books. She's had a TED Talk and other things. One of her most famous ones, she talks about the difference between sympathy and empathy and compassion. There's a short little animated video online that's really
opposite.
Huh?
Is that what they call near opposite? Sympathy is a near opposite of.
I'm not sure if that's the language she uses or not. I may have heard that, but
She does a lot of research on shame.
Yeah, shame is one of her research lines, but she has a vulnerability. Yeah, shame, vulnerability, compassion, empathy. She has a new book that just came out a few months ago about emotions, called I think it's Map or Atlas of the Heart. Yeah, and there's actually, I just discovered today that she has a HBO series, a mini series, almost set up like an Oprah show. There's a live audience and stuff, and I started watching the first episode today. But anyway, it's really interesting. So if you have HBO, I would it comes with my internet. So
what is it called?
If you just search Brene Brown, was it
It is Atlas of the Heart.
Atlas of the Heart.
Is it HBO Max?
Yeah, I think HBO Max. Yeah. Atlas of the Heart. But there's a book too, so you don't have to, subscribe to HBO to get, her message or whatever. But huh?
She has a thing on Netflix.
Oh, really? Oh, okay.
It's like a performance. It's not performance. It's like a motivational thing.
Like a lecture kind of thing or whatever. Yeah.
Her books are audible too. She's great to listen to.
Yeah, but yeah, I just wanted to connect with. Huh?
Something everybody does every day. Different service that exists in
yeah, I mean, I think for us, Brene Brown's name in healthcare has made the circuit and has gone viral in some circles. So yeah. But yeah, anyway, I just wanted to connect that with what you shared, Shinmyo, about kind of approaching your experience and naming that from a different way. So yeah, so
actually what you said even clarified it more, because instead of giving it a judgment, I just said how I was feeling at that moment, which was an absolute truth.
Yeah.
But wasn't a judgment.
Right.
It was just a feeling.
And I think if one practice I did when I was practicing early on in the Ann Arbor Zen Temple, we were given, as Dharma students, we were given homework. Like before I took the first 5 precepts, we had various like kind of homework projects. And one of them was to keep a journal or log and try as best as you could to note every time you made like a judgment or evaluation about something or opinion.
Or someone or something.
And anything, a person, an experience, a preference, whatever it is.
That'd be hard to work.
It's really hard to do. But I think the practice of being like having that assignment made me more cognizant of what it's like. I don't want to keep writing all this stuff down, so I'm going to stop making all these judgments, right? It's like these ways, just shut your mouth, and then and there's another one, like not to talk about anybody if they were not in your presence. That one's a good homework assignment too. Yeah, right. And I could talk about a lot of different things. It goes into also the work of Marshall Rosenberg in nonviolent communication. Also about being more particular and descriptive in the language that we use, because how we speak about things also influences how we think about things and how we feel about things. And Brene talks about this in the first episode of Atlas of the Heart too, that human language being a portal into our emotions, right? So words have a lot of power and direction and influence. So just some food for thought I give you for that. So we're at the end of the hour already. We did not get into start chapter 4 yet, and it's a little bit longer than the last chapter. So rather than reading it together now and opening up a lot of stuff that we won't obviously have the time right now to start to reflect on, let's take chapter 4 as our kind of home practice for this week. So I'll entrust that we'll all start focus on chapter 4, which the name of chapter 4 is Flowers. Flowers, yeah, right. Shrubbery, and yeah, right. So chapter 4 will start this week, and I think with this new structure that we have more time, if we find we're getting really into deep conversation and connecting lots of things, we can even spend more than 1 week on a particular chapter. We're under no obligation to take a chapter a week. So if some chapters are really meaty, then we could stay on one chapter for more than a week if we decide we want to, or feel there's a lot to do there. But so next week we'll start talking about chapter 4. I'll put together a little something on Mara, since Mara has come up in the Dhammapada, so we can try to understand what that is a little bit, so that way we can put it in context for our Dhammapada study. I'm going to mute myself. Jack, do you have anything else you want to ask or contribute here before we
No, not really. Just I really appreciate you setting this up so I can be a part of it. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Jack. Were you able to hear okay?
Yes, very good. Yes.
All right. Yeah, I got to figure out, there's a feedback loop because the microphone is so close to the computer. So I'll have to figure that out. So that way I won't have to switch back and forth. So that'll be part of my homework too, is figuring out how to make this all work a little bit more smoothly for that. So do you all have time for another 5 minutes just so we can do a closing kind of a short meditation? Okay, great. So I'll just take about 5 minutes to sit, and then we'll end with the closing gatha after that. And we'll end with our closing gatha. The Dharma, incomparably profound and minutely subtle, is rarely encountered, even in hundreds of thousands of millions of kalpas. Now we see this, hear this, receive and maintain this. May we completely realize the Buddha's true teaching, and may the merit of our practice, our study, and our efforts penetrate into each thing in all places, so that we and every sentient being together may realize the Buddha way. Thank you all so much for sharing part of your evening again, and continuing on this journey of practicing with the Dhammapada. So we'll be back next week. We'll start chapter 4, talk a little bit about Mara, and just keep things going. So thank you all so much. Appreciate it. All right. Thank you, Jack. Have a good night.